Welcome back to the Daily Dawg podcast. This is your Friday edition of GameWeek 1. And as promised, today what we're going to do is get into taking a deeper dive or a little longer look into Gunner Stockton. We took a look on Wednesday at Marshall and Georgia and what we expect from each and get a sense of where we think this game is going to go. Yesterday we took a look at what's Georgia's perception and standing, both with the national media and with the SEC media, as far as what are our expectations? Where are we? What are people looking for? And as fans, how do we interpret that? And what do we expect about that? One of the things I left out in yesterday's discussion as we went through and talked about the other competitors, the other teams that we think are contenders, both for the SEC and in the top for the national championship, or at least the playoff race. Two things. One thing, really never spoke much about Notre Dame. I referenced them as being part of that group of teams. I did put a little bit of writing attached with the podcast if you took a look at it. But I just want to circle back to that and say, look, from Notre Dame, they are obviously a playoff contender. Are they the team that's likely to win the national championship? First guess, I'd say no. I mean, just taking a look at them and how they stacked up compared to us. Yes, we lost to them last year, so not trying to be sour grapes, but they were not a complete team. You look at the stats from that team. I mean, the quarterback didn't even throw for 100 yards. We helped them a lot. The strip sack turnover that gave them the ball on the 13-yard line and led to an immediate touchdown on the next play definitely turned the game, and if that wasn't a problem, then it was something of a nail in the coffin when we gave up the kickoff return to open the second half. Those were their only two touchdowns of the game. They did not drive the field and score touchdowns. They had less than 250 yards of offense in the game. They were primarily a team that leaned on their offensive line and their running game. They had a quarterback who was gutsy and strong-willed, but not a great playmaker. Most of the year they didn't feature a lot of great wide receivers, although during the playoffs they had a few guys emerge. I'm not sure that those guys are really going to take off and be players throughout the year. They lost a lot on offensive line, and now they're switching quarterbacks. They may be better throwing the ball, actually, with the new quarterback stepping up, and maybe the wide receivers step up. But they do still have a great running back, so we'll expect them to lean on their defense like they did last year, lean on their run game, and play conservatively and try to play smart football. And that's really what they did last year, and they rode that formula all the way to the national championship game, but they were overmatched when they got to Ohio State. They made it close late, but Ohio State really controlled that game the whole way through. And like Texas and like us and Ohio State, I think that Notre Dame's a team that, is going to have to reload a little bit and take a step back because they lost some of the pieces that were really important to what they were doing. Primarily an offensive line and now starting over with a new quarterback. So want to touch base on that. Also, I want to correct something that I made a mistake about before. When I know I make a mistake, I will try to go back and let you know. I had mentioned that we had, having lost Mikael Williams and Javon Walker last year as our two main pass rush guys, that we also had a key guy transfer out, and I listed that as Gabe Harris. Gabe Harris is a pass rush specialist for us, but he is still on the team, and it's actually Damon Wilson who transferred out and is now at Missouri. But both of these guys look like up-and-comers, but Damon Wilson was definitely a guy. He was a little higher rated coming in as a prospect, and he was definitely a guy who looked like he was making strides and would have been a top pass rusher for us. So not entirely clear why he decided to transfer, although I can guess maybe there was, yet to be featured more on their defensive line even than in our group, and also probably NIL money. So, but that's just speculation. Anyway, I just want to clear that up. I had mentioned Gabe Harris had transferred out. Gabe Harris is still on the team, and we hope he will be a productive pass rusher for us, but Damon Wilson did transfer out. So let's get back to what we wanted to talk about today. Today we really want to feature taking a look at Gunner. There's a lot of talk about Gunner Stockton, and you'll hear people talk all the time about their quarterbacks. and you'll hear quotes or things, the quarterback is the most important player on the team. You can be X deep at all the different positions, but it's really just one guy at quarterback. Or there's the old adage when you see teams that aren't sure who their quarterback is and they're rotating guys in, a team that has two quarterbacks has none, stuff like that. So that's not our case, we don't think. I mean, we're looking here and we expect Gunnar Stockton to be the guy. Ryan Puglisi was highly thought of and showed some signs in the spring game, and I'm sure has been making a competition of it to some degree from what we hear. But we expect Gunnar to be the guy. Gunnar was, a fairly high-level recruit in the 2022 recruiting season. He came into school early, he redshirted, and then he was a backup in 2023 and a backup in 2024. So he's gotten into some games and had some limited experience, but let's just have some perspective for a moment, because I think one thing is we do emphasize the quarterbacks a lot. We think a lot about the quarterback as the face of the team, and you can't win without a top quarterback. Except for, Georgia won 2 national championships with a guy who was a walk-on quarterback, and even once he walked on and played and demonstrated some skill in the game, even won the first national championship. A lot of national media and even some of us Georgia fans looked at him and said, well, maybe we should go back to the 5-star guy, that we recruited. And so even when Stetson Bennett was our MVP and led us to a championship, we weren't sure he was the guy. And that's because of the prejudice that's there. Quarterbacks we want them to be, statuesque, Greek god, Adonis-bodied sort of guys who are 6'4", 6'5" with cannon arms and, can make all the plays. And so anybody who doesn't live up to that, who's even a couple inches shorter, the NFL gets a little soft on a guy who's 6'1" or 6'2". Therefore, we get a little soft on him and we think, oh, I don't know, So I think, it's important to take a look and sort of compare what we've had, who we've had, and think a little bit about who Gunnar Stockton was. A lot of you probably know. I mean, a lot of you, I think, follow recruiting, follow all the details of the team, so you probably have a pretty good idea who Gunnar Stockton is. But I just want to go back and say, look, he was a recruit in the 2022 season. He was somewhere between the 110th, 115th ranked player in the country, depending on which recruiting service you look at. He was a solid 4-star guy. So he was one of those guys who'd be in your ESPN top 300. He's in those, top 300 recruits in the country. He was generally thought of around maybe, say, the 7th best quarterback available in the country when he was recruited, and probably the 11th best player overall in Georgia. I think one of the things that's really amazing, I remember when he did sign with the team, how amazing his stats were coming out of high school. I mean, they're just unbelievably prolific. He threw for 13,562 yards and 177 touchdowns for whatever reason, I couldn't find exactly how many interceptions he tallied in his 4 years playing high school football. But I can tell you for sure that his senior season, he threw for 4,134 yards, 55 touchdowns, and 1 interception. So I think he was a very low turnover guy. He also, by the way, added 4,372 yards rushing and 77 touchdowns. So he accounted for more than 220 touchdowns in high school, passing and throwing, and he had a very low interception turnover rate. He put the ball in the air a lot, and he took care of it. He got it to where it was going. His junior year, he threw for 4,709 yards with 71 touchdowns. I mean, that's just outstanding. So now, for some perspective, he played at Rabun County High School. He's from the small town of Tiger, Georgia. You might remember that Charlie Warner, tight end that we had for a while, went on into the pros a few years back. Charlie Warner was also from Rabun County High School in Tiger, Georgia. So that's in the old days, I guess we used to call it 1A, 2A, 3A, but now Georgia high school football has gotten so big. At the top level, you have 6As, and it was 4A was the top when I was in high school, but now it goes up to 6A, and there's still so many schools stacked in the bottom. They split up what we think of as A classification into 2 different divisions, one Division 1 and Division 2 of A, and then there's like 80 schools in each of those divisions. So I don't know if it's terribly important which one he's in, but you got a lot of academies and charter schools and small Christian schools down in this category where he was competing against. He was his high school, again, they had enrollment of about 660 kids. So my high school had a graduating class of nearly 600 people, or at least around 500, 550, I think. So, which it seemed like more than half of joined me at the University of Georgia when I was there. It seems like I bumped into them all the time. But, in the area where I live now, here in Georgia, the high school that's in our region and that my kids attended is a 5A school, and has about 2,500 students, or somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500 students. So Gunner Stockton was playing in a smaller pool. So I think it's just, again, I'm not trying to knock him. I just want to put some perspective because those stats are amazing. I also do remember, ESPN, as you get in the early season, sometimes they'll put they'll put high school football on a Friday night. And I do remember my daughter and she watches the Georgia games with me and has been a fan for years. I do remember we were excited one day to just be sitting at home and saw that ESPN was broadcasting the Raven County High School game, and we got to watch Gunner Stockton play when he's in high school. And I think while we were watching, they won the game and put up 40-something points. And I think we didn't watch the whole game. We just watched probably 30 or 40 minutes of it. And I think he scored 2 or 3 touchdowns, 1 running and 2 passing or something like that. We're watching. So I remember being excited, like, wow, this is quite the kid. And what I think my first impression of him, and when he was recruited, because Stetson was still on the team or at that time, I think a lot of people thought the comparison was he's Stetson Bennett but better, because he's not super tall. Again, he's not 6'5". He's listed at 6'1", 6'2". A lot of times those listings can be generous when you just look at him. He doesn't look to be that tall, but he is definitely taller than Stetson Bennett, and he's thicker. He's listed in the Georgia Media Guide this year at about 215 pounds. His recruiting profile said he was about 220, 225 pounds. So he's, but even the scouting report says he's a thicker guy. So he's he does not have, that sort of cannon arm, although he has a strong arm. But he's, we saw some throws the last couple of years when Beck was starting, Carson Beck, where one I remember in particular, Ladd McConkey, I think in the Tennessee game 2 years ago, where he just rifled that ball over the middle. I mean, it was just one of those throws where you're like, wow, not everybody can do that. It was like a 25-yard pass for a touchdown right after a turnover, I think. And I mean, he just zipped it into McConkey, and I think the cornerback and the safety were just, I don't think they had a chance because of the speed, the accuracy, and the low trajectory of the ball. And I'm not sure Gunner's that kind of an arm, but I think he's got the arm to make the throws that we need. The coaching staff is pretty high on him. One of the things I wanted to take a mention of or talk about is I've definitely seen in the media out there's a relatively strong perception that, we're not sure about Gunner Stockton. I have been for years, since it was founded, a fan or following The Athletic. The Athletic was it was a sort of an app website thing that was started by sports writers to cover things in their region all over the place. It was kind of started for and by sports writers for sports fans. It's now owned by the New York Times. I don't know if just because the New York Times owns it, it's going downhill, but it is kind of going downhill. It looks like cost cutting. And for instance, Seth Emerson, who writes for The Athletic covering Georgia football, or used to be covering Georgia football, now they seem to have lost some people and that were covering the SEC in general, and they've moved Seth Emerson over into a SEC role with still kind of a Georgia focus. But for me, that means that I get a lot less Seth Emerson articles that I like and enjoy that are just focused on Georgia. And of course, as an SEC fan, Georgia fan, I'm certainly going to read the SEC articles, but it's sort of like the point of this podcast. One of the reasons I wanted to bring this material to you is I feel this sort of sense of hunger every day that, I want at least 10 or 15 minutes every day where I can, when I got a chance to take a break and read something, the first thing I'm going to do before I go to the news or other things, I'm going to look to see what's out there that I might could read about Georgia or the Atlanta Braves typically, especially during baseball season. And probably Georgia year-round, to be honest. And so less Seth Emerson has not been great for me. And there's been some other guys that are national writers I used to follow. One that's still there, Stuart Mandel, I think does a good job. And anyway, Stuart did a SEC preview article a few days ago on The Athletic, posted on August 20th. And he thinks Texas is the top team, like a lot of people. He thinks that Texas will go 7-1 in conference. He thinks Alabama is going to rise up and do much better than they did last year. He's a believer in Kayla DeBoer and Alabama, and he has them going 7-1 as well. And then he also thinks LSU and A&M are all going to be ahead of us. He thinks we're going to straddle the playoff bubble and 5-3 in conference and 9-3 overall. And one of the reasons he says is that he listed very specifically, I'm selling on Gunnar Stockton. So he's not a Gunnar Stockton believer. Also, when I'm working out on one of the podcasts that I listen to, I follow the ESPN Game Day podcast with Reese Davis. I really just appreciate the way he moderates that podcast, has a host of different people that join him along with Pete Thamel regularly now, and other guest hosts and other guest appearances. But they do a good job of just looking at college football in general. And I know that just listening to the podcast there, Reese Davis also, as he hosts Game Day, when you watch Game Day every Saturday, he doesn't often give his opinion as much during the show. He's more of the host, and he's encouraging the bevy of people they have on the set there to talk. And he doesn't put his 2 cents in as much, but he does more on his podcast. And he, his take was the same. I think his take is that, look, Georgia's still a title threat, a playoff threat, an SEC threat, but his point of view on Gunnar Stockton seemed to be, prove it or let's see it. And so, I think we're all a little bit that way. I mean, I think we feel like we've had quarterbacks, that we could count on. We feel like we've had elite guys. And I just have this perception or this sense that there's a little bit of, thinking of Gunnar as like, we have to settle for him. Yeah, we had him on the roster, but we were trying to get a better guy. And that was also promoted recently in the media coming into the season also because apparently we did take a crack at bringing in a quarterback or two from the outside, especially this kid from California last year who ended up in Indiana, his name Mendoza, and he's an NFL prospect. He's maybe, depending on how he plays this year, somewhere between a first, third, fourth round prospect in the NFL. So he's got more of the traditional size and the NFL drop back kind of passing play, arm status kind of player, and he did a good job at Cal, and now he's moved over to Indiana. So I don't know if that's an upgrade, but it's an interesting. Indiana made a lot of noise last year, and if they're good again this year and he leads them, they'll make a lot of noise again. So it was reported, and I think it's probably true. I don't have any insight one way or the other on what happened there, but I'm not surprised that the coaching staff went after him. But I don't know if that's so much of an indictment about Gunnar Stockton as it is that when you, as Kirby and his staff have a responsibility to all of us and to the university. A lot of money, time, and effort has been spent, and we're in championship mode. We've committed the resources across the board, whether it's building facilities like the new locker room and recruiting facility at the stadium that Kirby wanted, they put in a couple of years ago, finally committing to and getting a full indoor practice facility like Coach Rick wanted for all those years and only got like a goofy little partial one. And so, we're all in these days, and it's paid off, right? I mean, we're at the top of the recruiting. We're in the top 3 to 5 every year. These last couple of years, we've won 2 national championships, a couple SEC championships. So it's working. The all-in is there. So there's a responsibility when you have that much invested to make sure that one thing that you didn't account for can't take the whole process down, right? So I mentioned before, we got Ryan Puglisi. He's not played any meaningful snaps or any snaps in a live game yet. He was a fresh recruit last year. We've also got another kid now, Ryan Montgomery, who was this most recent recruit. And then we have a local kid from Clark Central who's a walk-on. That's the quarterback room behind Gunnar Stockton. So I think that Kirby and the staff, and they've done this before, and they've showed it before. Coming in to the season a couple of years ago, you might remember there was a dual threat quarterback that had made some noise at Wake Forest and made them a bowl team, Jamie Newman. And you might remember, you might not remember because he never actually played. It was during that COVID era. They brought him in as a portal transfer to sort of shore up the quarterback options and make sure we had some depth. And he opted not to actually play. He opted out in the way the things worked during COVID. So we also brought in, you look back last year before, we brought in Jaden Rashada, which this was the guy who made a lot of news in the very early days of NIL and collectives with the Florida collective trying to sign him to a $7 or $9 million a year, or not a year, but a total contract worth $7 or $9 million or something like that, or maybe $11 million, some kind of a crazy figure. And he was the number 44 overall recruit and a top quarterback recruit during his high school recruitment. He, initially said he was going to sign with Florida, and there was a lot of discussion about this huge deal money that he was supposed to get. And then, as it turns out, the Florida collective was, as they used to say when I was a kid, the eyes were bigger than their stomach. They didn't actually have the money that they had promised him, and so he was able to get out of his commitment to go to Florida, even though there's not supposed to be a direct pay for play connection especially in the early days of NIL, but he was able to somehow work his way out of, or I don't remember all the details, but he wanted out of his commitment to play at Florida, and he got out of that commitment one way or another because they weren't going to be able to make good on the money they promised him. They didn't actually have it. So he ended up going to Arizona State, and then he bounced around and he became available. He's another portal quarterback, and we brought him in, and he was somewhere on the team for a year and didn't get any action, and he's out. And so that's an example, though, of, again, I think he's in the same. I think the whole idea about bringing in Mendoza from Cal was not necessarily an indictment that the coaches don't think that they can win with Gunnar Stockton. I think it's more of an indictment of the fact that because of the way the portal and NIL and some of our recruiting misses, to be honest, where we took a swing at some guys that didn't end up on the team, like Dylan Riola, who's now playing for Nebraska and played tonight, or Thursday night. This podcast will come to you on Friday, but I'm recording it Thursday night. And so I watched that game, and he played fairly well, I guess, but he's now leading Nebraska, and he was our 5-star, top 10 recruit, top 10 nationally recruit that we were going for and didn't get, with that last minute change of heart. And then before that, so what I was trying to say is we have some holes. Oh, well, before that, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I completely apologize. I was wanting to get to this later in the segment. I was going to make this comparison with Gunnar and Arch Manning. We were going after Arch Manning, as you might remember, and we went big after Arch Manning, and it came down to us in Texas, and he went to Texas. So the swing and the miss at Arch and the swing and the miss at Dylan Riola in back-to-back years means that we didn't have one of those top 10 national players, number one quarterback recruit, top everybody wants him guy in our quarterback room. And we didn't have as many quarterbacks in the quarterback room, period, as the coaches would like to have, which is why each of the last couple of years they've gone out on the market and looked to see what they can do to bring in. And the Rashada guy was an example of a guy who had potential, and they were happy to have in there to create some competition and a backup to, if everything just went horrible or terrible injuries befell us. But he wasn't the guy, and he didn't end up playing for Georgia, and he was gone when we really never saw him hit the field. So I'm not saying that's what would have happened to Mendoza, and maybe if Mendoza came in, maybe it would have been a competition because he has a lot more experience. So maybe it would have been a tough competition between him and Gunnar. But I also know the coaches, we've seen this time and time again. They don't confer with me personally, but we have seen that Kirby is definitely a guy who believes in, he doesn't name starters. He sometimes doesn't even tell you who the starting quarterback is going to be as the team's running out onto the field. And he has always been coy with the quarterbacks, and he's always believed in competition. So he thinks that, guys being pushed not settling in and thinking it's theirs to just have, but being pushed to have to earn it is clearly one of the modes that he operates in. So, the idea of bringing in, even though they didn't get Mendoza, I think just the idea that they were going out and looking for him was good for Gunnar. It's good for all the guys in the quarterback room, so they can take a look at the sense of saying, hey, nobody's entitled. We're going to keep bringing guys in. And to that end, in the 2026 recruiting cycle, we had a commitment a little while ago. And again, I'm not going to get too deep into recruiting. That's really not my thing. But I do follow the top line a little bit just to know what's going on. And this is important as it relates to the players we do have now and what we're doing and what's our perspective about quarterbacks. So point is we have Jared Curtis is a top recruit, number 11 recruit in the country, number 4 quarterback overall. And he has pledged to be a part of that 2026 class if we hold on to him. And it looks like a strong commitment right now. But again, that's getting deeper into recruiting than I mean to. But I wanted to give that comparison to say, okay, so then by the time he signs, if he stays with the team and signs in February or whenever the early period is, or whichever one he's going to sign in, if he ends up signing, then we'll presumably have Gunnar Stockton, Ryan Montgomery, who signed last year, and he was the number 180th recruit overall, the 14th overall quarterback. We got him out of Ohio. And then Ryan Puglisi, who was the 134th ranked recruit and the 10th overall best quarterback in the class of 2024. So I think that's where the coaches want to be. They want to have at least 3, if not 4 guys who all believably could be the starter, because it only takes one guy transferring and one guy getting injured, and next thing you know, you're playing your 3rd guy, and the 4th guy is your backup. So, and then behind him, QB3 backup becomes a walk-on usually. So that position gets thin in a hurry, but it's also hard to stockpile talent there, and it was always hard, honestly. Even before the portal and transfer and NIL era, and now it's even harder. And on that note, I also want to take a moment and say, just to be clear, what I think happened, and again, I have no special insight, but just talking about Gunnar Stockton, what do I think, not Gunnar Stockton, I'm sorry, Carson Beck, what do I think happened there? Because I'm not sure that everybody has the right perspective on that one either. Generally speaking, I think Georgia fans should be happy for Carson and cheer for Carson, and I hope he plays well at Miami. And it'll be interesting if we end up playing Miami in the playoffs. That's going to be an interesting thing. But Carson Beck was not disloyal to Georgia. Carson Beck expected to go pro. He waited a long time, and he got his chance, and he played a season, and we came up short of the championship. And it was thought that if he played one more season and continued to show he could maybe move up from a 2nd or 3rd round draft choice up into the 1st round draft choice. And that was the idea. He was supposed to be making strides coming into the season last year, and a lot of people did have him listed as the number 1 overall recruit, and they were expecting a great year from him. And I think statistically he had a really good year, but the general consensus is that he regressed. He didn't take a step forward and become even better, he regressed. And whether that's true or not, Georgia also took a step back. We lost 2 games. I mean, hell, just losing a game was a new thing for us coming off the win streak. But so then we lost 2 games in the regular season. Hadn't done that in a long time. So the perception's definitely going to be that there was a regression there. And I think statistically there was. He definitely threw a lot more interceptions. He had 12 interceptions last year to go with 28 touchdowns, and I think, he only had 4 or 5 or 6 or something like that. I think it was maybe 6 the year before. So, I think people were looking for Carson to go back out there and put up like 4,000 yards or more of throwing and, maybe 30 or more touchdowns and keep his interception rate down in the anywhere from the 2 to 6 range. And had all that happened and Georgia had made it at least to the national title game, then I think Gunnar would have gone pro and he probably would have worked his way into being a 1st round pick, maybe even the 1st pick, or at least the 1st quarterback taken. Instead, the perception was he slipped, and so that created some problems for Beck, because he played the season, then he got hurt, and so now the question is, is the NFL going to draft a guy with a hurt arm, or does he have to get that arm fixed and come back out and still show that he could be a top-level quarterback to get the right draft choice? And you don't hear a lot from Georgia about, you hear all these numbers being thrown around from other schools about what kind of money they're paying athletes in their collective. You don't really hear a lot about what Georgia pays people, and money is never the first thing you hear talked about when in recruiting or in any of the processes. But we know that Carson Beck was getting paid. I mean, we all know the Lamborghini story, right? So he got money, and it seems pretty clear that when he had made his choice that he was moving on and expected to go to the NFL, that Georgia planned to move on, and they allocated whatever money that would have gone to him and went to him before that helped him get a Lamborghini and other wonderful things. And good for him, by the way. Congratulations. I begrudge nobody them earning the money they're entitled to. So, but Georgia, there's just a limited amount of funds, and they had planned to allocate the money somewhere else because they knew they were having to go to get a deal with a new starting quarterback. And so then when he got hurt and reevaluated and decided he could play some more, and then I think Miami also came out and approached and said, hey, and from what I understand, again, not completely published, but they're fairly reasonably accurate reports or people we could trust out there who've indicated he probably got in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 million to go play a season of football at Miami. And that money's probably as much guaranteed as he would have gotten with his draft status. So I mean, it's really a no-loss deal for him. He goes back to college for one more year. Quarterbacks can play a lot longer in the NFL than wide receivers and linemen and running backs because if they do their job right, they don't get hit. And so, losing a year of NFL playing time is not going to hurt him that much. And he's probably made the kind of money he might have earned at the draft status he had achieved. And so maybe more. And so if he improves upon his draft status and comes back to the NFL next year, and is in a higher position, he'll gain even more money. So it was a good decision for him. It was smart. It works for Miami because they needed a quarterback. And he was not being disloyal to us. Both parties had already planned to move on, and it was just hard to change that course of action when that happened. So anyway, this also sort of fits into the conversation about Gunner, and how did we get to Gunner? Because I think, again, there's sort of this perception of like, hey, we're just sort of stuck with Gunner. We didn't mean for Gunner to be here. So, kind of review real quick. Gunner's a highly ranked prospect. In fact, Carson Beck was the 234th prospect in his recruiting cycle in 2021. He was the 5th overall QB and the 33rd best player out of the state of Florida. And so he was a 4-star guy. And so Gunner is actually a higher rated 4-star prospect coming in as out of high school than Carson Beck was. So, and he's right up there about the same level of most of the guys we've had playing in the last few years and the guys that we've recruited recently. So I don't think we should feel like we're, like we took something off the discount rack or something here because we're starting Gunner Stockton. Gunner Stockton was a guy we believed in and we recruited and we wanted to be here. So, and now he's ended up being the starting quarterback. I think one of the comparisons I mentioned before that I wanted to get to, and I think is a really fascinating thing to think about, is we did go hard after Arch Manning, that elite recruit. And as it turns out, Arch went to Texas. He was behind a 5-star guy in Quinn Ewers. They stuck with Quinn Ewers the first year, which made sense because Arch was fresh out of high school. Quinn Ewers came back and played, which was always something that might have happened when Arch was recruited, and I think him and his family knew that. And he stuck around and waited behind Quinn Ewers, and now it's his turn. But, as it worked out, this is also the moment where, with Beck moving on, this is the moment where Arch would have been in a role to step in and step up for Georgia. And so that's fascinating to think about when we, especially if the SEC comes back down to Georgia versus Texas, one way or the other. It's kind of fascinating to think that, like, hey, we recruited hard for Arch Manning, and Arch and Gunner would have been competing if Gunner had stuck with his commitment. When Arch came in, and for now, I'm just going to assume he would have. It would have been fascinating to see what actually happens. We would have had that direct comparison within our program. Which of these guys gets the nod? I mean, I think as I say that, everybody's sitting out there saying, wow, oh my gosh, well, Arch would certainly win, right? Well, I don't know. I mean, look, Arch has got the deliverables. Okay, he is that 6'4", 6'5" guy, and he's got the arm that can make all the throws, and he's much more athletic than his uncles, his famous uncles. He's much more like his famous grandfather, who was a scrambling, running quarterback in addition to being able to throw the ball. So, Arch has a better set of wheels. He's more mobile, and he's definitely more, he's already listed as maybe the number one draft pick for next year's draft and a Heisman favorite. So, and a lot of that is, yes, his famous name and the pedigree, but a lot of it is also, to be honest, he's played very well, both in high school and his early showings in college, and he's got the deliverables. He's the quarterback everybody's looking for in terms of size and stature and what he looks like, more so, say, than Gunnar Stockton is. So, but I don't know. I don't know for sure. The only way we ever would have known is if Arch had come to Georgia and both Gunnar and Arch were competing for the job. It'd be interesting to see now what's happening. But as and if they face each other again in the future, because they were, Gunnar, obviously took over in the second half of the SEC championship game. Arch played some in that game, but that was not a game that was billed as, Arch versus Gunnar as the starters. But this year we're going to have that game for sure, because Texas is coming to Sanford Stadium. So we're going to see that. And then there's, as Georgia fans, I think if Texas is what everybody says, then we hope that the SEC is going to come back down to Georgia, Texas, right? Not that I'm hoping that we get to play Texas twice, but I'm hoping that we're one of the two teams in the SEC championship run or in the game. And, everybody else is kind of anointing Texas into that spot already. So if that turns out to be true, then, maybe we will see the game twice again. And this time it really will be Gunnar versus Arch both times. And, I just want to get it on record and say, hey, when we get to there and we get to the end of the season and we look at the results, let's think back to this moment and talk about, hey, we wanted Arch. A lot of you, I think that if we had gotten Arch, you'd probably think, hey, he's the guy I'd want starting. He's the guy who's probably going to beat out Gunnar Stockton. And, going into the season, I guess the other comparison I wanted to make between them, because I think they make great comparisons about where and I talked about this yesterday with the status of the team, vis-a-vis the other contenders for both the SEC and the national championship. One of the reasons, like I read Stuart Mandel's sense that he's selling on Gunnar Stockton, or referenced Reese Davis, just having kind of a wait-and-see attitude, is that seems to be the consensus is between those two out there in the media on Gunnar. Nobody is coming out and saying, look, I think Gunnar's going to be awesome and he's going to lead Georgia to a championship. You're just not seeing that. You see wait and see, or I don't think he's the guy. And I think that's really interesting. I mean, he has played a little bit in his early career. Not a lot, but he's gotten into some games. He played in the Tennessee Tech game in the second game of the year last year. He got some mop-up duty time where he went 10 of 12, which is 83%. He had 90 yards passing, no touchdowns. So, a solid rating, not great. I mean, 7.5 yards per attempt. The elite number you like to see there is 9 or above. So, but he was 10 of 12. Nice completion percentage. So he came in the game and he played well. He got in for a few minutes against UMass in November. He was 3 of 4 for 75% and 45 yards. Not much you can say about that. That's just a little bit of time. Unfortunately, we didn't blow teams out a lot last year, right? So he didn't get as much opportunity to play. He did play the second half against Texas, and you all saw that. And, we remember the horrible interception that could have cost us the game but didn't. But generally, he managed the game well, and the team came back and won. So there's positive memories and thoughts there. He was 12 of 16, which was also a 75% completion percentage, 71 yards, which is a terrible 4.4 yards per attempt. So that's not exciting. And then against Notre Dame, he was the starter. So for the first time, he was the starter, and he came out and he was 20 of 32, which is 62.5%, 234 yards, which is solid day production-wise, 7.3 yards attempt. Again, that's not elite, but it's solid. And he had a touchdown. He was, like a 134 rating on the rating system they gave him. So far in his career, he's thrown for about 500 and something yards as a passer. He's also been able to get out and be a little bit of a runner in some games. He had a couple carries in that Tennessee Tech game I mentioned, didn't really go anywhere. He had 8 carries in the game against Texas in the SEC championship game for 8 yards. So that doesn't look awesome, but he did get sacked. So sack yardage counts against your rushing totals. And of course, that's also counts on the 8 carries. And then against Notre Dame, even worse because of the sacks and just the difficulty we had running the ball. And we could not run the ball at all. Gunner, running backs, nobody against Notre Dame. He had 10 carries officially for minus 23 yards. So that's pretty bad. But he's put up some yards running. So he's been in a few games. He's run a little bit. He's thrown some. His throwing has been incredibly accurate, if not for a lot of yards. And I think the yardage and those plays are also what the coaches ask. Kirby has always been conservative when putting backup quarterbacks in. He doesn't have them just gunning down the field and, putting up a couple hundred yards. He's not into embarrassing other teams. So they have them try to execute the offense, but they usually don't. When we're up big late and the guys come in for mop-up duty, they usually don't have those guys pushing the ball deep downfield. So you're not going to see great averages in that kind of a setup. Arch Manning got to play quite a bit more last year. Ewers was hurt some, and they blew out a couple teams more, and they had some easier teams at the beginning of their schedule. Arch was 6 of 5 against Colorado State for 95 yards and a touchdown in the first game of the year last year. He played a decent amount against UTSA, the Roadrunners, Texas San Antonio, in case that didn't jump off the page for you. He was 9 of 12 for 223 yards. That's a massive 18.6 yards per attempt and 4 touchdowns. So that really got people excited. That's a 341 something game rating, which is absurd. But he's playing against an overmatched team, and he just wiped them out. And so, and then he started against Louisiana Monroe, and or maybe he didn't start against Louisiana. I don't know. I didn't look that up. I apologize. But he did play a lot against Louisiana Monroe. He had 15 completions on 29 attempts, which was only 52%, but 258 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. So Louisiana Monroe, also not an SEC team, but a solid team. And, he put up some decent yardage, but not a great completion percentage, and he made some mistakes, threw a couple picks. And then he got another start against Mississippi State. And he was 26 of 31 in that game. And this got a lot of people excited when he had to step in for Ewers and start this game. He was 26 of 31 for 325 yards, 84% completion percentage, 10.8 yards per attempt, and 2 touchdowns. So that's fantastic, and against an SEC foe. He only had a little bit of play against us as a change of pace, and when Ewers had to go out, he was 3 of 6 for 19 yards, and he had a carry or 2 in that game too and didn't really gain any ground. He also played in the Florida game and was 3 of 6 for 19 yards. So, all totaled, he accounted for about 1,000 yards of offense, running and passing. He had a really nice completion percentage of about 68%. He threw for 9 touchdowns against 2 interceptions. So he wasn't perfect, but he was really good. He struggled a little bit against Louisiana Monroe, of all things, but was really great in the next game against Mississippi State. And then he played sparingly the rest of the way. So the comparison I'm getting at there is, look, Gunner and Arch have both started and played limited amount of football, and we've seen them a limited amount. But Arch Manning, for several reasons, some including that his name is Manning, some including that he has the stature and the look, some including that he did have at least one highlight reel game where he started and just had an incredibly good game against Mississippi State, even though he played in limited action. That's got people, and his 5-star, number 1 overall pick kind of status, as coming out as a high school recruit, that's got people saying, hey, even though this guy's had limited game action, we believe in him. We think he's going to be the number 1 draft pick. He's going pro after this year. He's going to be one and done, go pro. He's going to win the Heisman, and he's going to lead Texas to the SEC championship and the national championship. And then you got a guy in Gunner Stockton who's also a highly rated quarterback, not as highly rated coming out of high school. Also been waiting his turn in the program for a couple of years. Also playing for an elite team with a stacked roster with national title implications. And he's also played sparingly in just a few games and looked good mostly when doing it. But, the thought there is, I don't believe in him, or wait and see. And some of that may be, maybe if he'd had a chance to start a game against Mississippi State and throw up 300 yards and a bunch of touchdowns, people would say, wow, look at this guy. Instead, he had to step out there in an SEC championship game against an elite defense and then turn around and be the starter for a playoff game on the road in a neutral site against Notre Dame, a team that went on to be in the national championship game, even though I don't think they were truly the best team to come out of the playoffs, even as the second best team. But I think they advanced and they earned it. And they had a really, really stingy defense. They were really good on defense. So I mean, Gunnar Stockton's significant time that he played, and we all saw him play, was, with a playbook not designed for him, against two of the probably top 20 defenses in the country, maybe higher than that. I should have looked that up. But so, I don't know if it's a fair perspective. And that's the comparison I guess I wanted to make is, hey, we've got, Gunner's had limited action, but he's an elite guy that we wanted to be our team leader when we recruited him. Arch was obviously that guy for Texas. They've both been waiting their turn. One guy, people think he's going to do it all, be the number one draft pick, win the Heisman, win an SEC championship, take him to the national title game, win the national title. The other guy, wait and see is the best you're getting out of it. I don't think that's a very fair comparison. I'm not trying to oversell Gunner. I mean, we don't know. That's one of the things when we talked about breaking down, what do we want to see on Saturday? Look, it's overmatched competition, but we want to see him execute. We want to see him put up a game like what Arch Manning had against Mississippi State last year, I'd love to see him go out there and be 26 of 31 for 325 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's perfect. That'd be exact. And then I'd like him to do all of that before the end of the third quarter so some other guys can play, right? And so we can start the process of people saying, hey, maybe this Gunner guy is better than we're giving him credit for. So, that's where we are. Gunner's going to most likely be our guy. I know people have talked about or think, hey, Ryan Puglisi's been playing. And look, I think the coaches are high on Puglisi. He might have been a guy who was underrated as a prospect, as only the 134th rated player, which is still really high, nice 4-star player. But a lot of people think he might have been underrated. I mean, he played at a private boarding school in Massachusetts, which is not the hotbed of where people think about getting quarterbacks or any college players out of, right? But he really performed well, and he believes in himself clearly because he's come down to Georgia and he's ready to compete against whoever he's got to compete against. So I'm glad he's there. I wish we had a guy behind Gunner who had a little more experience. If things really go well this year, it is true that most of the season is going to live or die on Gunnar Stockton. And, that's a lot. But look, we've had it happen before. I was going to make another comparison. I mentioned that I'm also a big Braves fan, and once in a while you might get some bonus Braves material. But I was thinking about this the other day. A recent example just come up. We have a prospect as the Braves pitchers, Hurston Waldrop. Maybe if you're a Braves fan, you've heard about him or seen him. He pitched in 2 games last year. And he was horrible. I mean, he got crushed. I mean, gave up 7-8 runs. I think he gave up 16 runs in less than 8 innings, had an ERA of like 13 or 16 or something. And, people thought highly of him as a prospect, and they called him up. We needed somebody to start in a couple spot starts, and he just got hammered, So he made the 2 starts. Neither was good. He sent back to the minors. And with that, he was not the first guy called up when we started having pitchers go down like guys in a Civil War, marching lineup, the front guys. You think about the old days where they stand there and shoot at each other from 10 feet away and everybody's just dropping like flies. Feels like that's what happened to our rotation this year, starting with the Braves. But late in the season, we brought him in and, now the guy's the best pitcher on the staff. I mean, now that's not fair. Chris Sale isn't back and Schwellenbach isn't back, and Strider is just trying to find himself after his second surgery on his elbow, and Lopez is not pitching. I mean, just the list of guys missing and gone is ridiculous. But right now, he's not just the best pitcher. I mean, he like tied a record for a guy in his first 4 starts of the season or something as a rookie, something like that. I didn't get the whole record right, but basically he was like, he's 4-0 since he was brought back up with initially with like a .73 ERA, which matches like if you're a longtime baseball fan, you remember Fernando Valenzuela back in the 80s from the Dodgers. I mean, it's like he matched what Fernando did. And, Fernando was a phenomenon beyond anything anybody could have imagined. So my point in going to Hurst and Waldrop is guys need seasoning. So what you see the first time they step on the field, thinking about Gunnar last year or any other time you've seen him or even the spring game, that's not necessarily what you're going to get when they get a chance to just keep working and developing and they've got the talent. Hurst and Waldrop on the field last year, he was horrible. You would have thought, what's this guy all about? They bring him back this year, and look, there's no guarantee. This doesn't mean he's got it all figured out or he's not going to get tagged and sent back to the minors again. But right now, he looks like a guy who we got to start thinking about him in the rotation next year. 4-0, a sub-1 ERA. He's a different guy than he was just a year ago. That's what development does. So I think we all need to be excited about what Gunnar could be, not worried about it. I think we need to be supportive and excited and just say, hey, this is a guy who committed to the G. He committed to Georgia. And, let's give him the chance to be that guy and show that he's developed and he's ready to be a team leader. I think he has a lot of strong comparisons, obviously, Stetson Bennett, and he also reminds me a lot of Aaron Murray. Aaron Murray had those kind of crazy numbers in high school and passes, and, Aaron Murray wasn't the NFL stature guy either. And he didn't have the biggest arm, but he was smart. He was tough. He made plays with his legs and his arms, and he still holds a lot of records in the SEC and at Georgia. So if Gunnar could be anywhere between Stetson and Aaron Murray, then he can do everything Georgia needs to be a championship contender. So I'm not saying that's what will happen. I just think he has that potential, and I'm excited to see it. He is a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger than Stetson. And I do think that they'll probably, I don't know, again, I have no insight, but I would not be surprised if the playbook hasn't been designed by Bobo to do a little bit more around what Gunnar likes to do. And Gunnar, again, 4,000 yards and 70-something touchdowns rushing in high school. This kid, again, against lesser competition, even in the high school ranks, being a small school. But this guy can move. And I think that's something we were missing, last year. I'll break this down another time when you look at our stats, but one of the things that we really fell off last year was in third down conversions. We had been in the high 40s and 50% the previous couple of years, and last year I don't even think we were in the 40% range. And I think you go back and you think about Stetson Bennett. Stetson Bennett made a lot of great throws and a lot of big plays with his arm. I mean, a lot of people remember him dropping back and hitting Arian Smith, for that touchdown that got us back into the Ohio State game that led to the victory that sent us to the national championship game. And, I sort of see that, and that's Stetson Bennett sometimes in my mind, just rearing back and throwing. But Stetson Bennett also, maybe his greatest feature was his will to win and the fact that he was able to take so many 3rd and 7s that didn't go right and that the play was covered and just will 8 yards of rushing and get us that first down and keep us in the 48, 50-something% completion percentage. Third down conversion percentage, which keeps an offense on the field, keeps the defense off the field, and gives you a chance to put up more points. So I think, I'm really excited that Gunnar could be that guy who brings back that dimension. Beck scrambled and had a couple big runs for first downs here and there, but that wasn't his game, and that wasn't what we were trying to see him do. And maybe this year Gunnar will bring that back a little bit like we used to see from Stetson, and Aaron Murray could do some of that too. So listen, this is our breakdown or sort of a preview and a comparison on Gunnar. I hope that it gets you fired up about his potential. I'm not trying to just be a homer and say it's all going to be great. Maybe he's no good at all. I'm just saying I want to always give these kids the benefit of the doubt. Here's a guy who committed back in high school. He stuck with his commitment. He's been waiting 3 years to be the starter. Now it's his turn, and I want to give him every benefit of the doubt and believe in him and cheer for him. And I think we should all do the same, and I hope it works out. If it doesn't, then we'll see where we go. Unfortunately, we got some other guys, and we got some recruits coming in the future, and we'll see what happens. But, the other thing I'll say real quick, just before signing off, is just to remember that, we won 2 national championships with a guy that nobody wanted. We've been in the hunt most every year. We've recruited some top elite 5-star guys. Jacob Eason was, the number 1 quarterback everybody wanted. Justin Fields was the number 1 quarterback that everybody wanted. We had JT Daniels, was a 5-star elite top, one of the 3 best quarterback recruits, when he was recruited. We've had these guys on the team, and none of these were the guys that led us to the championship, or, so in the end, it's always turned out to be guys who are a little grittier and a little different, like Stetson Bennett, like Jake Fromm. Jake Fromm, not a top NFL prospect, also smaller stature guy, a little thicker, little more will to win than he is big arm talent. But he's a guy who got us to a championship game and nearly won the championship, won an SEC title. So, I think we have every reason to believe in Gunner, and I think we have every reason to be excited as we look forward to the game on Saturday. So, not exactly sure what we'll do for the next podcast, for the Saturday podcast, but we'll put one on for Saturday before game day, give you something to listen to if you get a chance for your tailgate. And not sure what that'll be, but I hope you'll come back, and I appreciate you listening now. Thank you for being a part of the Daily Dawg Friday podcast leading up to the Marshall game on Saturday. And as always, go Dogs.